We can't stop now.
The path is ahead.
You survived the end of the world. You made it underground. You outlasted the fireballs, the impact winters, the tsunamis, the collapse of every government, every city, every system you ever knew. You held your family together through the absolute worst thing that has ever happened to planet Earth since the dinosaurs stopped showing up to work. You did it. You're alive. Now what? That's the question that Greenland 2, Migration decides to ask, and honestly, that question might be more terrifying than the comet itself. Welcome back, everyone. If you've been on this channel for a while, you already know we don't do surface level movie reviews here. We go deep. We break down every beat, every character moment, every thematic layer, every creative decision that makes a film soar, or stumble. And today, we're giving the full treatment to one of the most anticipated disaster sequel films in recent memory. Greenland 2, Migration. Now, before we go any further, I need you to understand something. The original Greenland, released back in 2020, was not supposed to be a hit. It was a mid-budget disaster movie starring Gerard Butler, released in a year when the entire world was already living inside its own disaster movie. And yet, somehow, Greenland connected with audiences in a way that almost nobody predicted. It wasn't about explosions. It wasn't about special effects, though those were solid. It was about a family. A flawed, fractured, incredibly human family trying to stay together while everything around them burned to ash. That emotional specificity is what made Greenland special, and it's what made the announcement of a sequel both exciting and nerve-wracking in equal measure. Could they recapture that intimacy? Could they find a new story worth telling inside this world? Or would the sequel fall into the classic Hollywood trap of bigger, louder, emptier? Stick with me, because the answer is genuinely surprising, and we're going to get into every single inch of it. But first, one thing, if you haven't seen the original Greenland, some of this will still make sense, because I'll give you the context you need as we go. But if you have seen it, buckle up, because this sequel picks up the emotional thread exactly where you left off, and then it pulls hard. Let's go. Section 2, Movie Overview. Transition, informational but warm. Estimated runtime, 3 to 5 minutes. So let's talk basics first, because framing matters. Greenland 2, Migration was released in late 2023, distributed by Amazon MGM Studios, which should tell you something right away about the trajectory of this franchise. The first film was a Lionsgate production that quietly became one of the most streamed disaster movies during the pandemic. The sequel got a bigger platform, a bigger budget, and considerably bigger ambitions. The film was directed by Ric Roman Waugh, who also directed the original. That continuity matters more than people realize. Waugh has a very specific visual language. He's not a flashy, hyperactive director. His camera tends to be grounded, handheld when necessary, observational in a way that makes even chaotic action feel personal. He came up directing films like Snitch and Angel Has Fallen, and he has a genuine gift for placing you inside a character's body rather than outside of it watching from a distance. He brings that same sensibility to Migration, and it's one of the film's greatest assets. The cast. Gerard Butler returns as John Garrity, the structural engineer from Atlanta whose family survived the Comet Clark's impact in the first film. Morena Baccarin returns as Allison Garrity, his estranged then reconciled wife. Roger Dale Floyd reprises his role as Nathan, their young diabetic son whose insulin dependency was the ticking clock at the heart of the original film. The sequel introduces several major new characters. Scott Glenn plays Colonel Marcus Hale, a grizzled military officer overseeing the North American recovery operations, and a man with deeply conflicted loyalties. French actress Clémence Poésy joins the cast as Dr. Isabelle Renaud, a French virologist working inside the underground bunkers who becomes a central figure in the film's second act. And rising star Ayo Edebiri, yes, that Ayo Edebiri, from The Bear, takes on a significant supporting role as Kira, a young survivor whose backstory becomes one of the film's most emotionally devastating subplots. The screenplay was written by Chris Sparling, who also penned the original. Sparling's great skill as a writer is economy. He doesn't over-explain, he doesn't spell out every emotion in dialogue, and he trusts visual storytelling and performance to carry weight that lesser writers would hammer home with exposition. The film runs approximately 128 minutes. It had a theatrical run before landing on streaming, where it performed enormously well. Critical reception was mixed to positive. Reviewers who loved the first film mostly loved this one. Reviewers who needed more spectacle were disappointed. Audience scores were significantly higher than critic scores, which tells you something about what the movie is actually doing versus what some critics wanted it to do. Now let's talk about what happens in this movie. Section 3, Full Story Breakdown. Chronological, scene-by-scene. Estimated runtime, 25 to 35 minutes. Part 1, The World Below. The film opens not with action but with silence. And I mean that literally. The first 30 seconds of Greenland 2, Migration is almost entirely silent. Black screen. Then, gradually, a low ambient hum that might be ventilation systems. Then fluorescent light, flickering on in stages, illuminating a long concrete corridor. Text appears on screen 14 months after impact. We're underground. Deep underground. One of the government-built bunkers that the first film teased as its escape destination, the ones in Greenland itself, built inside repurposed Cold War military installations beneath the island's bedrock, designed to survive exactly this kind of extinction-level event. The camera moves slowly through the facility. It's crowded but orderly. Families in sectioned-off sleeping quarters. Children doing schoolwork at folding tables. Adults queued up for ration food. Medical stations with long lines. Everything is institutional, everything is beige and grey, and Ric Roman Waugh lingers on faces, tired faces, numb faces, faces that have been staring at the same concrete walls for over a year. This is the world John Garrity and his family now inhabit. We find John in the engineering section of the facility, working alongside a team analyzing structural data sent up from drone surveys of the surface. The surface remains largely uninhabitable. Impact winter, toxic particulates in the atmosphere, collapsed infrastructure, fires that burned for months and left the air chemical. The bunkers were designed for 3 to 5 years of habitation if necessary. But nobody really knows how long necessary will be. Gerard Butler plays John in these opening scenes with a quiet, contained energy that feels very different from the desperate sprint and fight energy of the first film. He's aged inside this role, not in a Hollywood makeup way, but emotionally. John has been through something that broke him open, and now he's sealed back up, functional but changed. He goes to work. He comes back to the sleeping quarters. He checks on Nathan. He watches Allison across the crowded common room sometimes, and there's a tenderness there, but also a new weight. The reconciliation at the end of the first film was real, but it didn't erase everything that came before it. These two people still have history. The apocalypse didn't wipe their marriage clean, it just gave them more important things to survive. Now that survival is slightly less immediate, the old frictions have room to breathe again. Morena Baccarin is doing something really subtle and beautiful in these early scenes. Allison is not unhappy. She's not falling apart. She's actually one of the most functional people in the bunker. She's organized a rotating childcare group, she's been working with the medical team, she's the person other people come to when they need to talk. But there's something Allison is carrying that she hasn't fully told John, and Baccarin plays that withholding not as secretiveness but as protection. She's protecting him. She's protecting herself. She's protecting the fragile piece they've built in this concrete world. Nathan, now played with noticeably more maturity by Roger Dale Floyd, who's visibly aged in the gap between productions, is navigating something genuinely difficult. He's 12 now. He was 11 during the events of the first film. He survived something most adults couldn't survive. And the other kids in the bunker either look at him with a kind of awe or they avoid him, because Nathan has a quality that children who've seen real darkness sometimes develop. He takes nothing personally, he laughs easily. And he's just slightly, infinitesimally older than everyone around him. His diabetes is managed but precarious. The insulin supply chain inside the bunkers is functional, but everyone knows the reserves won't last forever. This is the film's first ticking clock, established quietly in a scene where Allison reviews Nathan's medical charts with the bunker's head physician, a woman named Dr. Chen, played with brisk competence by Stephanie Su in a small but memorable role. The insulin math is simple, they have enough, until they don't. This is the world we've been dropped into. And Ric Roman Waugh gives us about 15 minutes to breathe inside it before the actual story begins. Part 2, The Fracture Lines. The inciting incident, the thing that cracks this carefully maintained underground equilibrium, comes from an unexpected direction. News arrives in the bunker from Europe. Specifically from a series of bunker systems in France and Switzerland, which were part of the same international survival program. The European bunkers have begun what the program calls Phase 2, Controlled Surface Reintegration. They've found zones of the surface that are, cautiously, marginally survivable. Not comfortable. Not safe. But livable enough to begin rebuilding. But it arrives with a complication. The European bunkers have documented a respiratory illness moving through the bunker populations, linked to impact particulates, recycled air, and compromised immune systems. People are getting sick. The very young and the very old are dying. The European bunkers lost 11% of their population in the past 4 months. 11%. In a world where every surviving human being is precious, where the entire gene pool of civilization has been squeezed into a handful of hardened facilities, 11% is a devastating number. This is where Dr. Isabelle Renaud enters the story. She's been working in the European bunker network as part of a WHO emergency virology team, and she's transmitted her findings to Greenland via encrypted drone relay. She believes she's identified a path to controlling the illness, but the Greenland facility has maybe 90 days before the outbreak reaches peak propagation. Colonel Hale treats this information seriously, but quietly increases preparedness protocols while suppressing the information from the general bunker population. He doesn't want panic. He has logic on his side. Panic in a sealed underground facility with limited resources and no exits is genuinely dangerous. John Garrity finds out about the illness data not from Hale but from a leak, Specifically, from a young engineer on his team named Davis, who accidentally accesses a restricted server partition. Davis is scared. Davis comes to John because John is the person you come to when you're scared and you need someone who's going to actually do something. What I love about how Sparling writes this moment, and how Butler plays it, is that John doesn't choose the heroic option because he's a hero. He chooses it because he has a diabetic son whose insulin supply is running low, and if there's a respiratory illness moving through the bunker population, Nathan is uniquely vulnerable. This isn't altruism in the abstract. This is a father doing math. Part 3, Surface and Shadow. The film's second act begins with a surface operation. Hale, under pressure from John and the medical team, agrees to send an advanced survey team topside, not to test Phase 2 reintegration, but to gather atmospheric samples for Dr. Renault's viral analysis and to scout potential routes toward the European bunkers. Waugh shoots the post-impact surface with a visual palette that's unlike anything in the original film. The original Greenland was shot in warm, golden and amber tones, normal American suburban life rendered almost nostalgically beautiful before the sky started falling. Migration's surface is rendered in cold blues, greys, and a particular quality of filtered light that feels like winter at noon, even when scenes take place in what should be summer. The world is physically intact. That's the eerie thing. The buildings of Nuuk, Greenland's capital, are mostly still standing. The roads are still there. The infrastructure is damaged but recognizable. It's not the rubble and dust apocalypse of post-nuclear cinema. It's more like a world that's been covered with a thin grey veil and then paused, abandoned. Waiting. They find what they need for the atmospheric samples. They also find something they didn't expect. Survivors. A small group, 8 people, including 2 children, who have been living in an abandoned fish processing facility near the coast. This discovery fractures the surface team. Protocol says to document survivor locations, provide basic medical supplies, and return. You do not bring unvetted survivors back to the bunker. The risk of introducing new illness vectors is too high, the resources are too strained. Ira doesn't wait for the debate. She starts helping the survivors before anyone can stop her. The argument that breaks out on that frozen, grey surface between John and the protocol officer, a by-the-book young lieutenant named Pierce, is one of the best scenes in the movie. Because both sides are right. Pierce isn't a villain. He's terrified, and he's following the rules because the rules exist for a reason. And John isn't reckless, he just cannot be the person who leaves a child behind. Not after Nathan. They bring the survivors back. Part 4, The Cost of Mercy.
Agreed.
And sure enough, it costs them. The vetting of the new survivors takes 2 weeks. The children especially cause a wave of emotional response in the bunker population. There's something about the sight of new children who survived outside, that hits the bunker population like a kind of grace. People cry. People donate extra food rations. People sit outside the quarantine section just to hear the sound of small voices. But one of the 8 new survivors is already showing early signs of the respiratory illness Dr. Renault has been warning about. They don't know this during the vetting period. The illness's incubation period is long enough that initial screening misses it. Within 2 weeks, 60 people are sick. Within 3 weeks, the first death. An elderly man named Gerald, a retired school teacher from Edmonton who'd been running an informal classroom for the bunker's children. One of the most beloved figures in the entire community. Gerald dies on a Wednesday morning. Hale tells John that afternoon. Butler's reaction in this scene is one of the quietest, most devastating pieces of acting in the film. John doesn't break down. He doesn't rage. He just sits with it for a moment. You see him doing the accounting. He brought the survivors back. One of them was already sick. Now Gerald is dead. John's mercy has a body count. I do it again, he says finally, quietly, to no one in particular. I know, says Hale. That's why I'm not angry with you. It doesn't mean you weren't wrong. This exchange is the film's thematic centerpiece in miniature. The tension between mercy and pragmatism, between individual humanity and collective survival. The movie never resolves this tension. It lives inside it. And that's the right choice. Part 5, Alliance and Revelation. The decision is made to mount a two-pronged operation. A team goes to repair the antenna array and re-establish full European contact, while another team prepares for an Iceland supply run to retrieve the medical materials Dr. Ano needs. John is assigned to the antenna repair. Ira volunteers for the supply run, partly because she's the most surface-experienced person in the facility, and partly because Ira always volunteers for the thing that takes her outside the walls. There's a scene before they split up that deserves specific mention. Ira and John, sitting in the bunker's cafeteria the night before operations begin. It's late. Most people are asleep. Ira tells John about her family. She hasn't told anyone in the bunker. She tells him about her mother, who drove Ira to a highway rest stop and told her to hide in the basement maintenance tunnels while she went to find Ira's younger brother. Her mother never came back. Her brother never came back. Eda Beery delivers this monologue looking at the table, not at Butler, and it's the right choice. This is something Ira is only able to say if she's not quite looking at another person when she says it. "You think they made it somewhere?" he asks. "I think they made it somewhere," Ira says, and the way Eda Beery says it tells you everything. She doesn't believe it, but she needs to say it, and saying it to someone who understands loss makes it true enough to function. Meanwhile, Allison has discovered something about Nathan's medical records. His insulin requirements have been shifting in a pattern that means his diabetes management protocol needs significant revision. It's not an emergency. But it's a complication with serious long-term implications. And Allison hasn't told John yet. Part 6, the antenna, and what they find. The antenna repair team reaches the external array site via a covered surface vehicle. The repair is technically complex but straightforward. What's not straightforward is what John finds in the antenna control room. Hidden among the installation's maintenance logs is an encrypted file. John, because he's an engineer and because something about the file's timestamp pattern feels wrong, cracks the encryption. What he finds is a series of communications between Colonel Hale and a government emergency coordination body that, theoretically, stopped existing at impact. What John can piece together is this: there is a plan. A real plan. A plan for which parts of the surviving population will be prioritized for surface reintegration, which bunkers will receive resources first, and which bunkers have been designated as what the communications euphemistically call consolidation candidates. Consolidation. Which is the kind of word you use when you mean something else. He takes copies of the files. He goes back to the bunker. He doesn't tell Hale what he found. Migration never becomes a paranoid political thriller, but this revelation adds a layer of institutional distrust to everything that follows, a sense that the walls of the bunker are not just physical but systemic. Part 7, the Iceland run, and the storm. The supply run to Iceland is the film's action centerpiece, and it earns every minute of its runtime. Ira's team makes the crossing on a modified surface vessel. Post-impact ocean conditions are unpredictable in ways that pre-impact meteorology can't fully model. What should be a manageable winter crossing becomes something else. The storm hits midway through the crossing. Waugh films the storm sequence with an intensity that's almost physical. The camera is on the deck with the characters, spray, chaos, the particular vertigo of a small vessel in enormous seas. There are no obvious CGI shortcuts here. The production clearly invested in practical weather and water effects, and it shows. It's genuinely, uncomfortably frightening. Ira is extraordinary in this sequence. When the navigation equipment shorts out and they lose bearing, the professional protocol is to heave to and wait. Ira looks at the sky, at the wave patterns, at things that she's learned to read by necessity, and she picks a direction. "That's not protocol," says Pierce. "No," says Ira. She takes the helm. She's right. They make it. In Iceland, the supply cache is located in a government facility sealed since impact. They take what they have and begin the return journey. And that's when the second complication hits. Team member OC collapses. Full respiratory failure. He's been incubating the bunker illness throughout the crossing. What follows is a 70-minute return crossing during which Ira improvises medical care for OC using the supplies they've just recovered, guided via radio by Dr. Ano from her European facility. This sequence, era's hands, Ossi's breathing, Dr. Renault's calm French-accented voice giving instructions across an ocean, is the film's emotional core. It's quiet and frightening and deeply, specifically human. Ossi Lives. Part 8, Confrontation and Choice. Back in the bunker, John has been quietly trying to understand the communications he found. He brings in one person, Allison. And Allison, who has been carrying her own secret, Nathan's medical records, decides in that moment that the time for protective silences is over. She tells him about the metabolic changes. She tells him why she waited. This is the best scene in the film. John and Allison, in their tiny sectioned off sleeping space, in the low light, with the sound of other people's lives all around them through the thin partition walls. "I've been protecting you from information," he says. "I know," she says. "We can't do that anymore." No. It's a marriage scene. That's what it is, underneath all the post-apocalyptic context. It's two people realizing that the version of protection they've been offering each other is actually a kind of loneliness in disguise. The confrontation with Hale reveals everything. Yes, the coordination structure is real and functional. Yes, it's been directing resource allocation. But Hale has been fighting for the Greenland bunker's position within that structure, lobbying, maneuvering, advocating. He's been lying to his people not to cover up his treachery but to protect them from a political reality he's been trying to change from the inside. And then, here's where the film earns its title. The coordination structure has issued a directive, migration. Part 9, Migration. All North American bunker populations are to begin surface reintegration operations within 60 days. Not a gradual phase 2 test. A full migration, above ground, into established surface settlements that advanced teams have been building and preparing for the past 4 months. The destination for the Greenland bunker population is a coastal settlement in southwestern Greenland, chosen for its sheltered geography, access to fishing and water resources, and confirmed breathable air. It won't be comfortable. It will be hard. But it will be above ground. Under actual sky. The catch, the migration window is narrow. The weather systems follow a post-impact pattern that creates a window of relative stability in early spring that they need to hit. Miss that window, and they're looking at another 6 months underground. 6 months underground means the illness progression will kill a significant portion of the bunker population. They have to go. They have to go now. Part 10, Departure from the Dark. The third act of the film is the migration itself, the planning, the departure, and the journey. Waugh handles this section with remarkable clarity and a genuine sense of operational realism. The film never loses track of the specifics, the vehicles needed, the route options, the medical equipment, the food supplies, the fuel calculations. It's the kind of logistics-minded filmmaking you see in good war films, applied to a civilian survival context. The convoy is 14 vehicles in a line, moving through a silver-white landscape under a sky that's more blue than it's been in months. The particulate density has been gradually decreasing. Waugh visualizes this with a slow warming of the film's color palette as the migration progresses, a subtle but enormously effective technical choice. The world is not healed. But it's beginning, just barely, to want to be. Nathan rides with Allison in the middle of the convoy. In the silence, watching the grey landscape pass, he says something that is the film's most quietly devastating line. "I don't remember what it smelled like outside." Part 11, Crisis on the Ice. 30 miles from the destination, the convoy hits a problem. A section of coastal ice shelf that the advance team's route assumed would be solid has destabilized. You cannot take 14 vehicles across fractured ice. The alternative route adds 6 hours and may not be navigable before the weather window closes. The weather data suggests they have a maximum of 4 hours. The math doesn't work. John looks at the ice. John looks at the vehicles. John starts doing what engineers do. He designs a crossing protocol, specific sequence, specific weights and speeds, specific spacing between vehicles to minimize compressive stress. A solution requiring perfect execution by people who've been underground for 14 months. It works. Almost. The second to last vehicle, carrying Ossi, drops partially into a fracture crack era, already across, turns her snowmobile around and goes back. What happens next is the film's most visceral sequence, fast, cold, desperately physical. It costs Kira her snowmobile, which goes through the ice. She watches it go with an expression that's genuinely funny in the middle of this terrifying sequence, the kind of course face you make when the universe takes something you were already prepared to lose. Everyone makes it across. Part 12, Arrival. The settlement appears over a rise in the landscape, and it is not beautiful in the way movie settlements are usually beautiful. It's functional. It's practical. It's made of prefabricated structures and salvaged materials assembled by people who were building for survival rather than comfort. But there are lights. There are buildings with actual walls. There's a medical facility. The arrival sequence is not triumphant in a fanfare way. People get out of the vehicles and stand in open air, real open air, sky above them, wind on their faces, and the response is not celebration exactly. It's something more primal than celebration. It's the specific physical sensation of a pressure that has been on your body for 14 months suddenly releasing. People cry. People don't even know they're crying until they realize their faces are wet. Nathan gets out and breathes in the outside air and closes his eyes and stays that way for a long time. John finds him there and stands beside him. What does it smell like? John asks. Nathan opens his eyes. Cold, he says. And like the ocean. And like everything. The final image of the film is not of the settlement or the people or the sky. It's of the ice they crossed, the long, white, fracture-lined surface, empty now, the convoy tracks still visible, leading from one place to another. From the underground to the open air. From survival to something that is starting, very tentatively, to be called living. Cut to black. Section 4, Character and Performance Analysis. Transition, analytical but warm. Estimated runtime, 8 to 12 minutes. John Garrity, Gerard Butler. Let me say something that might be mildly controversial. I think Gerard Butler gives the best performance of his career in this franchise, and I think Migration edges out the original. Butler is often used as an action guy, the growling, punching, quipping hero. He can do that in his sleep. But Waugh has consistently understood something about Butler that most of his other directors don't seem to have noticed. Butler's greatest strength as an actor is not intensity. It's vulnerability. Specifically, the kind of vulnerability that men who've been taught not to be vulnerable carry in their bodies, the lockjaw, the slightly too controlled stillness, the anger that lies just under the surface of the calm. John Garrity is a man who loves his family with everything he has and has, for most of his adult life, expressed that love badly. The first film cracked that open. Migration follows what happens after the crack, what happens when the trauma has been processed enough that the real work of being present, actually present, can begin. Watch Butler's face when Allison tells him about Nathan's medical situation. He processes the information, and what her withholding of that information means, and then decides, in real time, not to weaponize it against her. Not because he's suppressing it. Because he genuinely understands it. That's growth. That's acting. And it's beautiful. Allison Garrity, Morena Baccarin. Allison could easily be an ancillary figure in this story. The first film positioned her somewhat as a destination, the thing John was fighting to get back to. Migration refuses that passivity. Baccarin plays Allison as someone who has used the crisis period to discover herself in ways that slightly shock her. She's good at crisis management and community organization and medical triage. She's good at the things that this world demands. There's a complicated mix of emotions attached to that discovery, pride, grief, and something like clarity, because knowing yourself, even in reduced and precarious circumstance, is not nothing. Her arc is about refusing to protect through silence. It's about the difference between sheltering someone and diminishing them. Kira, Io Edebiri. The breakout performance of the film, full stop. Edebiri takes a character who could have been a plot device, the experienced survivor who provides the skills the plot needs, and makes her the emotional center of the entire second half of the movie. The key to Kira is that she's not defined by her trauma. She carries it. It shapes her. But Kira is not a trauma character. She's a person who had trauma happen to her, which is different. What Edinburgh captures is the particular quality of someone whose survival instincts and human instincts have become so intertwined that she can no longer tell the difference. She helps people because she wants to. She also helps people because helping people is how she survives, emotionally, practically, existentially. And because those motivations are fused rather than competing, she acts without internal conflict in ways that more neurotic characters simply cannot. Edinburgh is a generational talent, and this film confirms it on a platform even bigger than The Bear. Colonel Hale, Scott Glenn.
Path is ahead.
Scott Glenn is 78 years old and has absolutely no interest in phoning it in. Hale is the kind of role that lesser actors play as a villain. Glenn plays him as a full human being who is trying, within the constraints of his psychology and his institution, to do right by the people in his care. He's not corrupt. He's not malicious. He's limited by a worldview that was formed in a world that no longer exists, and he's slowly, painfully aware of that limitation. The scene where he finally tells John everything, where he explains himself, not as a defense but as an accounting, is Glenn's best scene in the film. There's a tiredness in it that feels true, the tiredness of someone who's been holding things alone for too long. Section 5, Themes, Symbolism and Subtext. Transition, philosophical and engaged. Estimated runtime, 8 to 10 minutes. The cost of mercy. This is the film's central theme, and it's one of the bravest things it tries to do. It doesn't let John off the hook. Bringing back those survivors caused the outbreak. People died. And the film doesn't walk that back. The film is asking us to hold two things simultaneously, the rightness of the moral instinct and the reality of the cost. It asks whether mercy can be evaluated the same way we evaluate pragmatic decisions, and whether a civilization that survives by abandoning its most vulnerable instincts is a civilization worth surviving. It doesn't give you an answer. It gives you John and Hale in a room together, both partially right, both partially wrong. The return to the surface. The underground to surface journey is the film's core metaphor. The underground is safe and suffocating simultaneously. You cannot stay forever. Eventually, survival has to become something more. It has to become life. You stay underground, inside the shock, inside the managed routine of pure survival, until you're ready. And then you have to come up. Even though the air is cold, even though the weather is unpredictable. Because there is no life underground. There's only survival, and survival alone is not enough. Institutional trust and its limits. Hale's subplot is a meditation on what institutions do and do not owe us in terms of transparency. The emergency coordination structure is not evil, it's arguably necessary. But its decisions are made by human beings with human biases and self-interests, and those biases don't disappear just because the world ended. The film's implicit argument, institutions need to be held accountable by the people they serve, even in crisis, maybe especially in crisis. Kira's arc, the transformation of survival skills. Kira's journey is about the redemption of what she might think of as her worst qualities, the ruthlessness, the rule-breaking, the inability to wait. These things let her survive. In the film, those same qualities become the things that save OC, that save the convoy at the ice shelf. The skills that felt like a moral compromise become generosity. The knife becomes a tool. The adaptation becomes care. Marriage is continuous work. The secret keeping that both John and Allison do is not betrayal. It's the normal, human instinct to protect the people you love from pain. But that instinct, when it becomes habitual, becomes distant. The film's argument, intimacy requires risk. It requires showing up without the protection of managed information. The exchange of secrets in that small sleeping space is a wedding scene. A renewal of vows in the most primal sense. The naming, migration. The title is doing real work. Migration is what animals do, moving from one place to another in response to conditions. It implies a cycle, an evolutionary pattern, something older than civilization. Calling the film migration rather than escape or return positions the human story within a much longer natural context. We're not the first things to have to move. We won't be the last. This is not tragedy. This is life. Section 6, Technical and Artistic Review. Transition, observational and specific. Estimated runtime, 6 to 8 minutes. The color palette evolution. The film begins in the blue-grady saturated tones of the underground. Every frame in the bunker has a slightly artificial, recycled light quality. As the film progresses toward the surface, the palette gradually, almost imperceptibly shifts warmer. It's a technique that sounds obvious when you describe it, but is executed with enough subtlety that most viewers will feel it rather than notice it. By the arrival at the settlement, the light has a quality that is genuinely beautiful. Waugh and cinematographer Brendan Galvin make this transition one of the film's quietly powerful technical achievements. The sound design. The sound design in Migration is exceptional and underappreciated. The underground sections are defined by their soundscape, the constant low hum of ventilation, the clunk of institutional doors, the particular quality of human sound in an enclosed space. These sounds become so embedded in the viewer's experience that when the convoy moves outside, the absence of that constant hum is almost physically disorienting. Sound designer Oliver Tarney creates a kind of acoustic homesickness that mirrors the character's psychological journey. Mark Streitenfeld's score. The score works primarily in texture and tone rather than traditional melodic themes. The film's emotional high points are often underscored with minimal or no music, which makes the music, when it comes, feel earned. The arrival sequence uses a theme that's been present in fragments throughout the film, a simple, ascending string motif, played in full for the first time as the settlement appears. It's not triumphant in a John Williams way. It's more like a sigh. Relief expressing itself as music. Practical versus digital balance. Waugh has always been good at balancing practical and digital effects in a way that keeps the physical world feeling real. The underground facility set is largely practical, built inside a decommissioned industrial facility in the UK. The surface sequences blend practical location work in Iceland and Scotland with digital extension and atmospheric effects. The storm at sea is the film's most ambitious effects sequence and its most successful, a combination of practical water effects, hydraulic motion platforms, wind machines, and very carefully integrated digital ocean that feels genuinely dangerous. Section 7, Critical Review and Comparisons. Transition, opinionated and balanced. Estimated runtime, 8 to 10 minutes. What Migration does better than its genre. The disaster movie genre has a fundamental problem. The disaster itself is usually the most interesting thing in the movie. Once the big event happens, most disaster films don't know what to do with themselves. The formula is, build to event, experience event, survive event, end. The post-event world is a coda. Migration refuses this formula by treating the post-event world as the entire point. The comet already hit. The world already ended. What does it mean to be human now? That question is not a coda. It's the whole movie. In doing this, Migration aligns itself with serious post-apocalyptic literary tradition, The Road, Station 11. These are not comparisons I make lightly. But Migration is reaching toward them, and the reach is sincere. Weaknesses and fair criticisms. There are real weaknesses. The antagonist situation in Migration is muddier than in the first film. Hale is too fully human to function cleanly as opposition, which is thematically right but dramatically sometimes frustrating. The film never quite has a scene where the audience's adrenaline rises in response to the threat of another human being. The coordination structure subplot, the encrypted communications, the political hierarchy, is intriguing but underdeveloped. It's clearly setting up a third film, and while I understand franchise architecture, there are moments where the setup for what comes next takes energy away from what's happening now. Lieutenant Pierce is a character who exists primarily as a foil, to represent rule-following instinct against era's improvisation, and he's never fully drawn beyond that function. The second act's stretches where the pacing sags slightly. The film is juggling too many subplots simultaneously and doesn't quite have the narrative economy to manage all of them without losing some forward momentum. Comparisons to similar films. World War Z, 2013, also a post-catastrophe survival film. Migration is considerably more intimate and psychologically serious, though World War Z has a kinetic energy that Migration deliberately trades for depth. Contagion, 2011, the most useful comparison. Soderbergh's film achieves something similar in its procedural, grounded, intensely human approach to catastrophe. Migration doesn't have Contagion's structural ambition, but it shares the commitment to realism over excitement. Leave the World Behind, 2023, another recent example of intimate, psychologically focused post-catastrophic cinema. Similar strengths and similar criticisms, rich character work, slightly diffuse plotting, enormous ambition that execution doesn't always fully meet. The original Greenland, 2020, Migration is better made in almost every technical respect, but the original has something Migration has in lesser quantities, urgency. A deadline that was cosmic and non-negotiable. That clarity of purpose creates a filmmaking energy genuinely difficult to replicate when the immediate threat has passed. Section 8, Final Verdict and Closing. Transition, warm, summative, personal. Estimated runtime, 5 to 8 minutes. So. Greenland 2, Migration. What is this film, ultimately? What is it doing? And does it matter? There's a specific kind of story that humans have always told, across cultures and centuries and formats, the story of surviving something unsurvivable and then having to figure out what to do with the survival. Odysseus gets home from Troy and then has to deal with the actual complexity of being home after 20 years of war and wandering. Every family that's come through addiction or illness or loss and found themselves standing in the aftermath asking, now what? The genre of disaster cinema almost never asks that question. It stops at the ending, the survivors hugging, the camera pulling back. The story is the event. The aftermath is the credits. Migration is one of the rare entries in disaster cinema that understands the aftermath is where the real story lives. Because surviving is relatively simple, in a narrative sense. You hold on. You do what you have to do. You keep moving. But living, actually living, building something, choosing what kind of person you want to be in the world that comes next, living is the hard part. Living is what the movie is about. Who is this film for? This film is for people who loved the original Greenland for the right reasons, not for the comet destruction but for the family, for the flawed humanity, for the specific and recognizable texture of people doing their worst and their best simultaneously. This film is for people who want disaster cinema to be more than spectacle, who want it to take seriously the question of what it means to be alive in difficult circumstances. This film is for people who've ever had a secret in a relationship and struggled to figure out the right moment to tell it, and understood that the right moment is usually a lie you tell yourself so you don't have to do the scary thing. This film is for Io Edebiri fans, who will not be disappointed. The final rating: 8.2 out of 10. 8.2 out of 10. The decimal is doing work, it's not around 8, because Migration genuinely exceeds what most films in this genre accomplish. The decimal it loses from a pure 8.5 comes from the second act pacing issues and the occasional sense that the political subplot gets in the way of the emotional story rather than enriching it. But 8.2 is a strong score. It's the score of a film that took real creative risks, earned most of them, and gives you something genuinely lasting in the form of performances and moments that stay with you. The cafeteria scene between Kira and John. Allison's face when Nathan says he doesn't remember what outside smells like. Hale's exhausted honesty in that final confrontation. Nathan closing his eyes and breathing cold air for the first time in 14 months. Those moments are what movies are for. And Migration has enough of them that I'll be thinking about this film for a long time. Outro, call to action. Warm, conversational sign-off. That's a wrap on our full breakdown of Greenland 2, Migration. If you watched this whole way through, you are my kind of person, and I genuinely appreciate you. This channel exists because people like you are willing to sit with a movie for 90 minutes and not just watch it but really reckon with it, and that makes all the work worth doing. Drop a comment telling me, Do you think John was right to bring back the survivors, even knowing what it costs?
That's far enough.
I'm genuinely curious where this audience lands on that question. Subscribe if you have an apostrophe T. Hit the bell if you want to catch future videos. And until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and for the love of everything, check on your neighbors. The apocalypse is a metaphor. Community is not. I'll see you in the next one.
Two cans for the water. Agreed. We need more ammo.